Good afternoon, everyone.
We hot?
No, we're not. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dots. Hopefully that's what you're here for. My name is Roman Daniliu, and I'm here with my co-chair,
Tobias Gunrum.
and we'd like to get started. So getting handed out right now is the blue sheets. You've likely seen this a number of times since this is Thursday of the week, but the NoteWell has been updated. Thanks, we already have Jabber, Scribe, and a note taker, and again, the blue sheets are going around. We have a fairly full agenda, but we have a buffer in all the areas to have the conversations, to include the drafts and the hackathon experience. We have an agenda split between the use cases, requirements, and architecture, and then a collection of various protocol drafts. Before moving forward, would anyone like to bash this agenda? Okay, I take that as a no. Moving forward. No, there's one more slide. So just to give everyone a status, since we last got together in Chicago, on your left there, you should see that all the various drafts we have been updated due to the hard work of your author and editor team. And you're going to be hearing from most of them today. We had a virtual interim meeting that checkpointed us halfway between Chicago and now in June, which laid out where we needed to head. And then there were two individual design team meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday to talk about specific draft areas. Specifically, the informational documents was on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday there was discussion about protocols. And I believe the various presentations will cover some of the specifics related to that. I just wanted to highlight where we stand in terms of kind of scheduling. We had been saying in Chicago and coming out of the interim that the vast majority of our informational documents would be completed in the summertime. We had aggressively said use case requirements in July, and then in September with the architecture document, the idea, of course, being to stagger them. And then we have very ambitiously had said to talk about the protocol documents by the end of this calendar year. I'd like to talk a little bit about that after we go through the individual presentations to see how closely we're still tracking against that schedule. Okay. So with that, that summarizes where we stand, and I'd like to hand it over to the first presentation, which is getting us right into the use cases. So Roland, you're up.
Here you are. Master key on. Great, thank you. One moment. Okay, hi everyone, I'm Roland Davins with Arbor Networks, and so we just got 07 out about five hours ago. As you remember at the interim meeting a little while back, we talked about 06. 06 we revamped a lot of the use cases. We actually added 9 new use cases, and unfortunately, due to a merge error on my part, we lost some of the revisions that had taken place between 4 and 5. So first of all, 07 fixes those inadvertent revisions, and thanks to Mohammed for pointing that out. There is a HomeNet use case that we need to get the sense of the working group on that. That was actually taken out in 06 and was put back for the sake of discussion in 07. We need to hear from the working group what the consensus is around the applicability of that particular use case. We added some additional context to the main sections for the inter and intra-domain use cases to add a little bit of flavor to talk about why there are some differences and why we believe that they actually should be separated out into 2 different broad categories. And we fixed some of the informative references. So now we're trying to track 08 as a WGLC candidate. When we revamped the use cases, we put in a lot of good operational context, but not enough dots context. If you've been with us for a while, you take a look at like 00 and 01, we were very, very dots heavy in terms of talking about the messaging flow between dots clients and dots server. It was a little bit too much without enough context. And so we've added some good use cases in there, but we've gotten some good feedback from some of the contributors to the document that we've gone too light on the actual dots interactions. So we need to add those a little bit more dots flavor to the actual use cases. It's just still some grammatical and terminological things that we need to take care of. We need to work on some of the orchestration section. It's good stuff, but again, just some of the phraseology and things of that nature. We need at least one additional intra-domain use case talking about suppression of east-west attacks within a transit provider. And of course, if folks have additional ideas for other use cases that you believe belong either in the excuse me, in the inter or intra-domain sections, please feel free to share those on the list. And then based on the sense of the working group with regards to the HomeNet use case, then we'll need to make some edits based on that. That's all I had in the presentation. I have a question. A couple of days ago, Andrew Mortensen actually led off a discussion about the HomeNet use case on the list, and we've had a couple of people reply, but I don't really think we've received enough input from the working group on that particular use case. So we'd really be grateful if people could read that on the list, look at the use case, and then tell us, number one, do you think it's really applicable? And number two, if it is applicable, any suggestions that you have for streamlining it, we'd be grateful to hear those.
So thank you very much. Technically, I believe we have 5 to 10 minutes for discussion if you have questions about the use case draft. We, as the co-chairs, appreciate that the latest revision was very, very recently. So we're not demanding that you have read it overnight. If you have, feel free to speak out. If you have comments, please feel free to say so now. Specifically also, if you want to reiterate your feedback about the HomeNet use case, yeah, so the floor is yours for questions or feedback.
Fleming Andreasen. With respect to the HomeNet use case, what is your concern about that use case?
Because it's not sufficiently different from several aspects of several of the other use cases that are already in there. Reading the write-up of it, there's nothing that seems to be very unique about it. And it's very rather verbose for being non-unique.
Okay, so it's not the scenario that you feel does not apply. It's just the way it's written right now. Is that correct?
No, again, I think the scenario is duplicative. If you take a look at the broadband access use case, if you take a look at the very first use case, which is a endpoint network with a single upstream transit provider, there doesn't appear to be a lot of difference, at least as far as I can tell, between those.
Okay, but again, just to clarify, the scenario itself, you don't view that as out of scope. You just don't think the way it's described right now sufficiently separates it from what else is in there.
That is my individual opinion, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Hi there, Artem Gavrichenko from Curator Labs. I have a few suggestions. First of the three to name it. First of them, speaking about the use case with MSSP requesting assistance from other MSSPs, I believe it's important to review the work that's done by another work group, especially CDNI, because though DDoS, MSSP, and the content delivery network are pretty much should be designed not in the same way, though some of the use cases may apply here. The second suggestion is as follows. There's the 3.2.1 paragraph about the suppression of outbound DDoS traffic originating from consumer broadband access network. In terms of outbound traffic, it's important to think about it because from the point of the side which originates an attack, actually the denial of service attack does not it doesn't differ a lot from an attack of another kind, so like I don't know, SQL injection and things of that sort. Thus,
Yeah, I have to disagree with that, but keep going. Yeah. keep going.
Thus, I believe that due to this, this use case may contradict with the working group chapter in a place where it says that the working group will focus on signaling and coordination mechanisms directly related to denial of source attack detection, classification, traceback, and mitigation. Because this, I'm now coining a term, but this, I'll say, abuse signaling might be a thing in itself, which will require maybe another working group for that.
Are those your comments?
Yes.
Okay. If
No,
you could,
I have a third suggestion, but let's.
no, go ahead. I want to
Okay.
hear from you.
It's just a technical one, because there's some inconvenience caused by there's a GitHub page for use cases which doesn't get any update currently. The version which is on Data Tracker is 7 from July 20th, and the version which is on GitHub is 5 from May the 4th, which also raises a question of what it all has to do with Star Wars. Okay. May the 4th. Sorry, that's a silly joke.
Yeah,
Okay.
well noted on getting GitHub updated. To your first comment, if you can give us some pointers on the list, specifically the SD&I stuff you'd like us to take a look at, that would be very, very helpful. With regards to the outbound DDoS issue, this is a completely distinct from other types of bad traffic emanating from broadband access network, in that it negatively affects the availability of the broadband operator and can have an extremely high impact. We've seen outages with literally millions of users, hundreds of thousands is very common, that are the result of outbound DDoS attacks that are launched from a lot of different devices, computers, and so forth, that are part of botnets on broadband access networks. Broadband operators spend a lot of time dealing with this and suppressing outbound DDoS attacks in a number of different ways to help preserve the availability of their network for their subscribers. And pretty much right now, I mean, there's kind of a constellation of tools that are used by different broadband access providers, and it's kind of bespoke, you know, for each one. They have different mechanisms. And so the idea here was to illustrate the fact that number one, dots could in fact be used to signal for the mitigation action of suppressing the outbound DDoS attacks. So there would be a standards-based mechanism to do this. So all of the different broadband access operators don't have to roll their own, you know, custom way of doing this. And secondly, it also offers up the ability to actually quarantine potentially nodes which are launching lots of outbound DDoS attacks. Some broadband access operators have implemented quarantine mechanisms, but again, it's all very, very customized, and it's only really a lot of the larger ones that have a lot of development resources to sink in to that kind of system. And so it's very distinct from confidentiality and integrity issues like SQL injection and that sort of thing. It's very specific to DDoS attacks. And not only does it have to do with DDoS attacks that are initiated by compromised machines in the user base of the broadband access network, but also by attacks that are leveraging misconfigured services on devices to do things like different types of reflection amplification attacks. And so, you know, sometimes the aggregate volume can be quite high and disruptive to the entire user base of the broadband access provider.
But the trend, okay, I see your point. I need to mention that the current trend that we observe is the maintainers or owners or users of botnets. They attempt more to hide their activity from the networks which originate the traffic, because it ultimately causes the elimination of some parts of botnets. The aim of designer of a botnet is actually to hide its activity from the okay, let's say personal computer on which it resides. because other way the user will get aware. He could buy an antivirus and solve the problem. So we've even saw Trojans and this kind of stuff actually healing computers from other Trojans and viruses. So it's really changing now. I think we may continue the discussion in the mailing list if it's...
Yeah, so again, I'm just speaking as an individual here involved in the operational community. That doesn't match what we see at all. We see the fact that the bad guys who are using botnets to launch DDoS attacks have so many different nodes that they don't care if many of them end up being remediated, because they have so many extra spare ones and it's easy to compromise new ones. Also, in terms of hiding DDoS traffic, that's not really easy to do. Very specifically, there is a scenario with the reflection amplification attacks where typically the initiator of the attack is, most of the time we see them actually being servers that are in internet data centers, either being their servers that belong to legitimate organizations, they've been cracked open and they're being abused, or they're so-called bulletproof hosters that cater to criminal elements. And those machines are capable of emitting spoof traffic, right? The spoof traffic then comes into the broadband access provider network, and it hits these devices that are misconfigured with things like open DNS relays, for example, or SSDP. And they stimulate those nodes to then send, the relatively high volume traffic out. So in that regard, the initiators of the traffic are certainly, I guess you could say that they're hidden in a way because it's difficult to trace them back in many cases. But the outbound DDoS traffic that is stimulated, that is sourced from the broadband access network, is not hidden in any way.
So in the interest of keeping us on schedule, I would ask for this conversation to go back on the mailing list. Or
Yeah, let's do more on the list.
And please, regarding GitHub, please.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get that done. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, the chairs will make sure that all the drafts are synchronized on GitHub. Thanks for that pointer. Kathleen?
Kathleen Moriarty, AD. Just a question. What are the plans for the use case document? Maybe a loaded question, but a question.
To who is this question? To who is this question?
Working group and chairs.
Okay.
The plans coming out of the working group when we last discussed this is that we would publish the working group document, the architecture document, and requirements document as separate informationals.
And the use cases? You want to
Sorry,
publish
did I
it or
not say use
publish?
cases? Yeah, I meant use cases, requirements, and architecture, which are three informationals, to publish them as individual, publish them as distinct drafts as informational.
Okay. So the IESG discourages these documents as publications because many don't feel that there's archival value in these documents. I do see the archival value personally. So you don't have to sell me, but if you do want them published as individual, as informational drafts, each separate, there will be a little bit of as long as they're informational, you just need my okay on it as, and it's in your charter and in your milestones, so that's all fine. The IESG is tending to encourage just to let drafts never disappear now, even once they expire. So to link them off of a wiki or something like that and not go through the full publication process. I leave that up to the working groups I work with. And if there's a strong desire to publish, I will work with you to do that. But I wanted to let you know of this preference before you get to IESG review and learn about it.
Okay. Tobias, working group co-chair. So I heard of this new preference.
Kind of new.
Kind of new.
But
The
it
point
was
is,
there last year too.
yeah,
And
but
the year before.
in
Not
light of
strongly.
yes, in light of that it was there, and these milestones were agreed and with the intention to publish. So at this point, I would say I understand that there's a preference not to do it anymore, but also I would say there is an agreement that there was a previous agreement to do it. So that's the procedural answer.
Yep.
The practical answer is I strongly believe that the use cases document and at the very minimum also the architecture document are very, very valuable for future readers to understand this. And I believe even the requirements document will be helpful. A number of these DOTS cases are non-trivial, and the use cases really helps to inform what you do with that. So I do believe they are quite valuable as informational documents. That's my personal
Okay.
opinion as
Okay.
working group
Can
co-chair.
any of them be combined, or is that,
Everything can be combined or not. I think that is something for the working group to explore
okay,
now that we have heard of this minimization. I actually don't think it's really reasonable because,
okay,
you know, combining it
Fair
will
enough.
still be the same volume of reading for the IESG. It will
Oh,
not
yeah.
change the amount, okay?
Yeah, it's just the
So-
number of documents then that get processed.
Yeah,
So,
but
and the number of times you see, you know, X number of stains on your documents.
yeah, so what?
I just wanted to raise all this so that
We,
I got
thank you.
the current viewpoint, and I am an AD that does support these documents. So that's fine. I will support what you want. I just need to make sure that that's what the working group wants.
Are there any other opinions in the working group? Because I just made a statement on my own. Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of, you know, publication versus non-publication, you know, I personally, individually don't care one way or the other. We've already received positive feedback from the folks working on architecture and requirements that the use cases revisions have been useful to them. The only other thing I would say is that, you know, DDoS is kind of an arcane, you know, subject compared to the rest of security. It's new to a lot of folks, and as we move towards, you know, getting things in, you know, into the standards track, and we want to encourage folks to, number one, implement DOTS, and number two, make use of it, that some form of guidance and context, you know, from the use cases we think may be useful for the implementers and the some of the actual potential users as well. Whether or not that means that they should be published separately, whether it means they should be folded into another document, I don't have an answer to that. But it's important, I think, that the use cases are preserved in a published document that can be cited, you know, to a vendor, for example.
Okay, so Kathleen Moriarty again. To your point about the summary and how things tie together, what has been received very positively is overview documents.
Okay.
And they would come at the end of a working group life cycle. And it might pull together a lot of the information that's in those other types of documents, but it would also show the connection between the various drafts in the working group and any other drafts or RFCs from other working groups. So RTC Web is an example of a draft that was viewed very positively, and it was an overview. So they're kind of similar. They just come at a different point, and they cover a bit more in terms of, you know, the connection between standards and what's been
Kind
done.
of overarching, more overarching, right?
Yep, yeah, just to one of your points.
Okay.
Just so the working group understands that.
Thank you.
Fleming Andreas, yeah, I mean, I still support all three documents. I think we had a little bit of a discussion around that actually in the design team meeting this past week. My read of that was that the general sentiment was that people were still in favor of these documents as well. So, you know, if anybody wants to speak up differently, you know, by all means.
And that's also something I think that we can revisit later, a little bit later in the process as well, right, Kathleen? Okay.
Okay, one last note to your question. Again, I think with the working group last call on this document, because we still have like activity on this
Yeah.
use case draft, I
We
think
have
it's-
at least one more
Yeah.
fairly significant update left.
Yeah, I think it's too early to call for working group last call at this moment
Correct.
for the use cases draft. Okay, thank you. Moving to requirements, yes. Here.
Bob Moskowitz speaking for Andy Mortensen and Joe Reddy. And I would say that Andy did the lion's share of all the work on here. But fortunately for Andy, he is at home where he belongs because his wife just had a child. So I am thus tasked with really going through Andy's slides that he worked on, and we'll go through here on the where we stand with the DOTS requirements draft. The changes since '05, we had good work group feedback following the last IETF. Added GitHub issues for all work group feedback, so we have been tracking that on the work group. Andy's again been done a wonderful job of seeing to that and keeping that going. Address all the new issues in '06, except for that 10 issues were closed since the interim. We have one remaining issue. Well, done quite well on this draft and completing items that people have brought up. What we have, no, these are some of the ones we've closed. Add authorization requirements, clarify replay protection requirements. And again, you can go and you can see what these issues were and what we said. So that is there clearly in the GitHub. Client must set mitigation lifetime. Client may incorporate server feedback, and servers must support black-white list management. So those are examples. So some of the 10 issues, there are 5 of the 10 that we addressed in this round. The one remaining open issue is the overlapping request handling, where 2 or more unqueried DOTS clients may report the same attack. And what to do, particularly if they're overlapping policy requests. Servers should handle this gracefully. Conflicting filters are more likely. And so the pull request forthcoming on this to handle this one open item. So there will be a 07 of this one issue, unless somebody says one more to go. But we will handle this one issue, and Andy has pretty much worked out the text, and Tiro and I are pretty comfortable with it. We'll review it one last time before we do indeed post it. So, and that's the point. We have not received any new issues for some time. We really believe that in terms of the requirements document, we are at closure. This one issue which is standing, which I just mentioned, this one issue, we will put into the next version of the draft. So you can read the wording on that. You can check out the wording we've done on these issues and the total 10 issues and how we handled it. But we really believe that we are, with the 07, we will be done and ready for work group last call. And so that completes my slide presentation. This is the GitHub location where you can see all this, and we'll welcome you to go and check it. And at that, unless Andy or Tira want to pipe in from online, I'm open for comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Artem Gavrichenko. Once again, have a few suggestions as well. I promise not to comment on the architecture document because it's far from last call. So give me some time. Regarding the definitions, there's a definition for a client signal that's limiting that is limiting the scope of a requested mitigation. Just as well, the requirement SIG 5005 tells us that the DOTS clients are responsible for specifying the types and scope of the mitigation. There are some key points here. First of all, the DOTS client is supposed to be some kind of middle box or software daemon sitting in the victim's infrastructure. The whole document thinks and speaks of the DOTS client as a decision maker, but in case of attack that's actually consuming bandwidth and limiting the data that's seen at the victim side, it appears like DOTS client may not be a good decision maker because it doesn't have enough data. Next, the DOTS client is, once again, in some cases, it's believed to be some kind of security appliance. Well, yesterday, the TLS group figured out that most endpoints, like middle boxes, like what's going to be a DOTS client, are not built for full-scale packet capture, which actually is so. While the upstream transit operator running the DOTS server is by definition capable of doing this. I'm not even speaking about the perceived quality, and I mean quality of a lot of these middle boxes, some of them at least. But the issue is that the DOTS server actually could know about the attack, lots more about the kind of attack, the scope of the mitigation. And it's not that feasible to leave all the decision making towards the client. There are also issues with congestion in this case. And lastly, this is inconsistent with the characteristic requirement on the page 5, on the bottom of it, which tells us that the purpose of the whole document, excuse me, is to design an advisory protocol. Yet, we here see that, let me quote that, in case when this client requests to stop the mitigation, the server should stop it in like 300 of seconds. Imagine a scenario where we have a chain of DOTS client servers. The architecture document even features a concept of DOTS proxy, which is essentially a chaining. And when an agent sitting on the left client side requests to stop the mitigation, but the whole bandwidth of an attack is quite larger than its upstream could actually handle. So he just cannot stop the mitigation here in this case, because it will essentially bring the whole service down. I think that here we should once again re-examine what the DOTS server must when the DOTS server must treat the mitigation as terminated, and when it should do it. But it's possible not to do that.
In the interest of time, I want to point out two things. We need to be brief with the responses, and two, I would point out that Andrew's in the queue. So, do you want Andrew to go?
And yes, let's Andrew answer this because one, he wrote much of that text, and I will say that this is an advisory message before I turn over to Andrew. And though the client says, I see this attack, as we said in many sessions, many times the server says, you see this attack, but the attack is really something else. We recognize that many times what the client sees as attack may really not be what the attack is, that the server having the broader view can see something much different. And so even where the client says, I'm no longer being attacked, but the server may say, yeah, you're not, but everybody around you still is. So those sorts of things. So I'll turn it over to Andrew and let him go.
And before Andrew starts, I'm cutting the line, so the three that are in line, that's it.
Okay, well, to the point that can everybody hear me, first of all? Make sure.
We can hear you, Andrew.
Great. So to the point that the server must cease the mitigation, I believe there's text in there as well that says the server may, is no longer, the server can continue to do it, can continue mitigation, but the client is no longer responsible for that mitigation. So if there are service agreements, if there are other sorts of business relationships between the client and server, at that point the client's responsibility is done. And if that's not sufficiently apparent in the document, we should address that.
I just said Sam, thanks for that.
Sorry, can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I don't know if that is sufficient, if making that clear will be sufficient for you, but if it's not, we can continue this here on the mailing list. It does sound like you want to see an issue in the GitHub tracker.
Yes, it's for now. It seems unclear. I think we'll need to get back to it in the mailing list. Yeah, thanks. One suggestion: would we want to use a mailing list for that or GitHub issues?
You can bring it up on the mailing list, and maybe it's that how you're reading, so that may clarify what the issue is. So no, bring in the mailing list first, unless it's really clear about something, and then let the mailing list maybe clarify the issue, and then put it up there.
We
Okay,
should have
that's
all the discussion on the mailing list. We're using GitHub to track that we have an issue whose resolution we'll have it on the mailing list. So please absolutely bring the issue to the mailing list, and then the authors, editors will make sure that it's dropped in and tracked in GitHub for us to closure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, one other thing. So you were saying that you feel the text is implying that the DOTS client must be some sort of a detection device, and that detection will be the trigger for everything. That's not necessarily the case, and I believe the architecture document does have a scenario where there's a manually initiated mitigation, where an operator uses DOTS as the vehicle manually, regardless of the presence of any attack. And regardless of any detected attack.
Correct, but I see your point that this is not necessarily the case, but this is the case.
There
still.
is a use case.
Excuse me,
yeah.
I'm cutting this discussion
fine.
at this point because I want to leave the other two people in the queue also the possibility
We'll
for
talk
comment,
offline.
and I suggest that we continue this on the mailing list. I apologize for that.
Good, thank you.
Very, very brief clarification. DOTS is not tied to any particular form of detection, classification, traceback, or mitigation to any particular mitigation model or technology. Is deliberately independent of those things. Secondly, there are use cases which denote other types of things besides security-specific devices making DOTS requests. And thirdly, we did have a use case in 0.0 and 0.1, I believe, which was an example of a mitigation service provider not being able to handle mitigation because of overcapacity issues. And so I believe this comment, we should think about bringing that use case back in to show a failed mitigation as illustrative of this type of issue. Thank you.
Yeah, short comment. I'm Kanamin from NTT Communications. Okay. Yeah, I'll do a report of implementation later. So in this presentation, the feedback from our experience is in. So yeah, I will do the feedback about the requirement later. Yep.
Okay, so maybe we're not quite ready for last call, but we'll take this to the list, and we'll bring up the list and see how close we are. I like to think we're close, but that'll be up to chairs.
One question as co-chair. Who of you has read the latest version? 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, somewhat 8 people. Okay. 9. Okay, and now you can raise your hands if you also have read some of the older versions, but I guess that's, yeah, okay, that's quite a number. Good. I think we need to move, like, how can we determine working dust call?
Why don't we read the draft?
Okay, so maybe we wait for the next version and then push that. What's your timeline for that?
Andrew, pretty quickly getting, here he comes.
I'm a slow ghost. Yeah, so there's the one outstanding issue, as Bob highlighted in the presentation. I do have some text on that. I will be sharing that with the other co-editors. And then I expect that to go immediately to 07. So I would anticipate actually early next week, assuming that aligns with the other co-editor schedules, but it should happen very quickly.
Why don't we do working group last call when there are no more open issues in the GitHub?
Okay, then thank you.
And thank you for your time.
Next up is architecture.
Yeah, next is architecture. I believe Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick Teague. Andrew put some slides together again, so I'm using props. So for the architecture draft, we had 2 revisions since the last IETF. We've incorporated all the working group feedback. Issue tracking is on GitHub. There are currently no issues. If anybody wants to put issues, feel free. We're awaiting additional multi-homing discussion that was spawned from the discussions we had last time that Med and Tiru have put a draft together from which I think Med is presenting shortly. The changes since the 03 was to emphasize reduced client control in recursive signaling caveats. So that was the client control over network path of mitigated traffic may be reduced. Define dot sessions. We had previously kind of like been having lots of discussions around the word sessions, so we tried to clarify that a bit better, and went from signal sessions to dot sessions, which is somewhat, so we tried to define it as an established bilateral exchange of data between dots client and server, so similar to SIP. Did I miss something? And we close issues 14 and 15 respectively. Remaining work, which is incorporate any changes resulting from additional use cases and multi-homing discussion. Obviously, there's been some discussion around the HomeNet mod stuff. We'll see if that brings anything up, and also if anything pops up from the multi-homing discussion. Adjustments resulting from implemented feedback. Kaname's I'm going to be presenting shortly, and he's got some very important and also good comments to come out of that. And then we're also going to meet for a comprehensive review, because just a top down through the whole thing, because it's been a while since I think we've tackled it from a kind of top down view. We've been like doing itty bits as we go along. And that's it. Any questions, comments, complaints?
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. I think a lot of people in the working group know that we've been working on use cases and then the requirements kind of in parallel with one another and informing one another bilaterally, so to speak. And we do have one more rev of use cases that's going to come out. We have 1, maybe 2 now, additional use cases, and then there's the HomeNet issue that needs to be decided, but we do not anticipate any new requirements that have not already been anticipated and discussed in these documents will arise from that last revision.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That was easy.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, then we save some time, catch up. Okay, thank you. Moving to a second architecture discussion about multi-homing.
And for context setting, as we got together at the interim, we had mentioned that there were some things that we needed to talk about related to the architecture, and one of those was related to multi-homing. And coming out of that interim, Tiru actually said they would write something up to the mailing list to get the conversation started. But the origin of this draft is actually one better. They actually made a draft about some of their thinking. So thank you for getting the conversation started in this formal way.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, so this is the background for having this this draft written and presented in this meeting. So just a recall of the main objective that we want to have when we wrote this draft. The first one is to complete the DOTS architecture document with multi-homing specific aspects, because currently there are some text which is in the architecture document which is on the multi-homing, but is not sufficient. Most of the text is likely to focus on the single homed networks. And the other one is to identify what are the specifics to the multi-homing context, so that they will drive the behavior of the DOTS client and the DOTS gateways when it comes to sending mitigation requests or maintaining association with upstream DOTS servers. And the last objective we set for when we wrote this document is to sketch some guidelines for all the entities which are involved in the multi-homing in the context. For instance, which DOTS server will select when you replace your request? Should you and also there's another problem whether the use of the unicast address is useful or it is harmless in some context, and especially in the context of the multi-homing. So why this document is needed? So the first one is that if you have a list of DOTS server that you are configuring to your DOTS client or your DOTS gateway, if you just select one of them in an arbitrary manner, it may happen that the request that you are sending to that server want to be handled by the server because the server does not own that resource. If you are asking, for instance, to black hole a given IP prefix, but if that server is not located in the upstream network, which is routing packets with that IP prefix, it can do nothing for you. So it's useless won't help the DOTS client to mitigate in the context. The other aspect that if you are just blindly and forking all the requests systematically to all the DOTS servers which are configured to a DOTS client or a DOTS gateway, it's something which is suboptimal because you are just overloading the upstream DOTS server. You are asking for an SOS alarm, but all this server may not be of help to you. And another problem is that if you have a list of those servers, and if you go sequentially to contact each of them, you are just increasing the delay to mitigate the request, so that it's suboptimal. So that's why there is a need to have some guidance somewhere in the architecture document or in a separate document to guide the DOS client and the DOS gateways on the way they will place the request and to maintain the association with upstream DOS servers. So which methodology we have adopted for this when we read that? So we started from the effort that is documented by Roland, so that we just extracted the viable use cases from there, and we augmented these use cases with specificity of the multi-homing. For instance, whether we will have one or multiple upstream providers, whether we will use one single or multiple routers to interconnect with the upstream providers, or whether we are using the provider independent or provider assigned prefixes in this context. And once we have augmented all these use cases by specifics of the multi-homing, then we describe the recommended behavior for each of the use cases that we have identified so far. For instance, if we can use Unicast or not, if we can fork the request, or if we have to stop it in the DOTS client itself. So basically, this is just a summary of some example, at least the main trends of the use cases that we can cover when we are dealing with multi-homing. I am not listening in this one the other use cases in which you have your mitigation provider. It's not your own transit provider, and this is a cloud hosted in a cloud. Basically, you have three flavors there, which are three of them which are likely to encounter in an enterprise context, and the fourth one which is likely in the broadband context, in which you have a CPE which is connected to multiple domains. The first typically a fixed access line, and the other one with a mobile pay element. And the three others, this is typically the enterprise network in which you have a multi-homed. You may have multiple upstream providers if you want to play with to optimize your SLAs. And in the three flavors, you have, for instance, the typical one in which you are using one single router or one single CPU router to interconnect to your upstream provider, or if you have using dedicated routers to interconnect to upstream service provider. So once we have identified this main flavors of having multi-homing, we will start to see now if we enable the DOTS service somewhere. So again, there will be a variety of scenarios there. You may have all your upstream providers, for instance, that support the server, but you may also have only a subset of these providers who offer to you the DOTS server. But whatever the scenario that will be experienced there's a constraint that is that some of the DOTS servers that will be available in these upstream providers may not be reachable through an arbitrary path. They will be reachable only from the router connected to the upstream provider who is offering to you the DOTS server. So there's a requirement there to associate the link from where you have learned your DOTS server. And so that if for placing upstream subsequent request, you have to always select that path. Otherwise, you will have failures to contact the DOTS server. Now, once we have identified the scenarios in which we will have a placement of your DOTS server, if we see now at the client side, again, there's a variation of scenarios there. With or without a DOTS gateway, you may have a gateway somewhere in the CPU on the router. It may be located elsewhere. There is no requirement in the DOTS architecture that the DOTS functional element be located in the data path or in the path that you experience in the DOTS attack. So you have this kind of scenarios there. This is only showing as examples there. You may have if, for instance, we focus on the first one in which you have, for instance, a gateway which is located in one single router, and connected to two upstream providers. This gateway, for instance, it has the responsibility to decide whether, when it receives a request from internal clients, it has to decide to which upstream that server it has to transmit the request, or it has to fork the request to all the upstream that server which is available. The question, Andres, or you can wait?
Yes, let me, Andreas. I have two questions for you. The first one is, I think we've tried to take a general design principle in the group for now of saying we want to address the simple scenarios first, and then we can always extend later on with more complicated functionality. So, the meta question is whether you think multi-homing is an absolute requirement for what we're doing as a first step in DOTS to address that scenario, or all these scenarios that you're specifying. The second question I have is, you seem to be getting into wanting to standardize exactly what a DOTS gateway is. And I don't think that we want to head down that path.
Yeah, so I will answer to the questions. Yeah, for the first one, yes, I do agree personally that we don't need to overload the current DOTS architecture with the multi-homing. My current position, take on this is that is to make it clear that the current DOTS architecture is mainly targeted for the single home, and to leave multi-homing for something else, so that the group will have time to focus on it and to study it further. So this is for the first question.
Okay.
For the second one, the DOTS gateway is defined as a back-to-back DOTS client and DOTS server. So we're specifying the DOTS gateway anyway. But anyway, that's another, how you glue your client and your server into, this is an internal implementation. We are not specifying that, but how you are placing your request, this is just a normal DOTS client, and in the other side, how the DOTS server will receive and process the request. This is how we are defining the DOTS gateways so far.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to rephrase that, I would say we recognize that it's possible to combine a DOTS client and a server, and we call that a DOTS gateway. And that's it.
No,
right? We don't go any further than that in DOTS. What that actually means, how that works, protocol support, all of that is out of scope.
Yeah, what we have seen in the DOTS architecture is that DOTS gateway is a back-to-back agent, which is a DOTS client and DOTS server. And for me, this is sufficient. Yes.
And that's it.
And that's what we require for this work.
And that is it in terms of what we specify.
Exactly. And I agree with that. And they want only to focus to stay at that level. Yeah.
Question is, co-chair. Because you said, well, this multi-homing, you don't need it now, but you may need it later. There may be no later. So I just want to make clear, like, if you believe this is essential, then say so. And if this is an essential requirement, assuming there is no later, that would be good if you could state it, if you believe it needs to be covered. If not, then that's fine for me as well.
Yeah, I can clarify this one. Yeah, so just when I called the methodology we used for that, we started from the DOTS use cases. And all what I'm explaining here is extracted from the DOTS use cases. So for me, this is something which is the working group have identified in this working group adopted document. And I do think that personally that this is something which is interesting to handle. There is something which is specific to multi-homing, which is not unique to the other solution that we have so far, which are just you have a single home and then you have your upstream DOTS server. There are something which is specific to be elaborated, but those details me in balance the DOTS architecture now. That's why I prefer to have it something outside the DOTS architecture. So this is two levels. It's important, but we may need to handle it in a separate document.
Okay, thank you.
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. DOTS absolutely must support multi-homing. It's been designed from the outset to support multi-homing. So far, I'm seeing nothing here that actually fits within the realm of DOTS itself. Some additional deployment guidance regarding PA space versus PI space, makes a certain amount of sense. But as we very consciously have had multi-homing, which is a hard requirement, in mind from DOTS from the outset, I fail to see anything in DOTS that is lacking in the protocol itself, nor in the conceptions of the DOTS communications nodes that precludes its use in a multi-homing environment. And as you noted, we have several different multi-homing cases in the use cases document, as well as the overlay provider, which is topologically distant. And in both 6 and 7 of the use cases document, we actually spend a fair amount of time talking about the additional external considerations that have nothing to do with DOTS itself that's required to make those models work.
Just a follow-up question, maybe to Roland or one of the requirements draft authors. Do we actually have a multi-homing requirement?
It wouldn't hurt to put it in here.
Well, if you believe it absolutely is required, then I think we should.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Okay, so if you come back to the use cases we have, and at least if you focus on the client side, as I mentioned, we may have scenarios in which we have the gateway and the others in which we don't have gateways. I do agree with Roland here that there is no direct implication on the protocol itself, but there will be implication on the way the DOTS gateway and the DOTS client will use the DOTS to contact the DOTS servers. So typically, if we forget the topology and we just focus on the DOTS association themselves, we have a variety of scenarios there, depends on the use cases. Typically, if we have for residential CP that it is multi-home, then there's two association. There's the one from the client that it is likely to be embedded in the CP itself. It has to maintain two association, one with the dots of all the network attachments. But when it comes to other scenarios which are more related to the enterprise network, we may have scenarios in which we don't have the gateway, and it's up to the entity which manages that network to decide how to configure the clients, whether the clients will be provided with both addresses of with the addresses of all the servers, or it may decide to have a DOTS client be configured only with one and only one DOTS server. So it depends on each configuration that you have. You will have a set of implications there and recommendation in the way this DOTS clients will contact their upstream providers. And all these recommendations are elaborated in the draft. To give you an example, if we zoom on this one, and if you have you have our original CP that's embedded DOTS client, and if it happens that all your upstream providers are providing to you the DOTS server, the first implications there is that because we are configuring names for the DOTS server, if you want to resolve that name, you must use a DNS server which is provided by the exact upstream network provider. It's maybe obvious and so on, but this is the list of items that need to be handled. Again, for the other selection and so on, there's also the establishment of the association that must be maintained with all the upstream servers. But when it comes to send a mitigation request, then the DOTS client has to decide whether it needs to select the appropriate DOTS server for a given DOTS attack, because the attack may be just received from the mobile network and not for the fixed, and etc. and so on. Yes, Andres?
So I'm not sure I agree with this. I mean, specifically the second bullet, right? Because that seems to assume that there is a very tight coupling between the provider of the access network and who the DOTS service provider is. And
yes.
That is not necessarily
yeah,
the
that's
case.
and perhaps you forgot my introduction there. I said that when you focus on the residential case that I mentioned here, which assume that the DOTS server is provided by your upstream network providers. And I said that if the DOTS server is for instance hosted by a cloud service provider, we are not in this use case. These recommendations are tied with this particular use case.
So how would I know which use case scenario I'm in?
This is the deployment specific. This is why this is tricky to handle. This is deployment specific.
That's why I'm pushing back a little bit on some of this stuff, because it very quickly gets very complicated.
Yeah, we have to figure out how to deal with this. I agree with you on that. Yeah. But this is particular to this particular use case.
Roland Admins, Arbor Networks. First of all, I want to second what Fleming said. Secondly, I believe that we're running the risk here of imbuing too much mitigation logic and context within DOTS. A lot of this stuff is external to DOTS, in my view. That it really goes into the orchestration systems and mitigation systems, and so I want to hear more. But this seems like it's we're talking about some problems that aren't necessarily problems. The DNS server recommendation in particular It doesn't make sense to me.
Oh,
Yeah,
can you
yeah,
explain why it is not doesn't make sense?
For upstream using the DNS servers learn from the same network. I mean, why can't I don't understand why I can't point it, wherever I want, right? And as a matter of fact, DOTS also has to be able to function in the absence of any DNS at all. So continue, but I have a lot of concerns about this.
Can you please repeat the point? I didn't get it.
I said DOTS has to be able to function in the absence of any DNS service at all.
May I suggest that we let you continue and finish your slides, and then we maybe take 1 or 2 minutes to discuss on the summary? At this point, only clarifying questions if you need them at this point, and then we bundle the questions at the end. Please continue.
Yeah. Okay. So the next point is that this slide is just showing some samples in which Unicast is not recommended when passing the DOTS request. The first case, if you have the provider independent addressing, if, for instance, the internet client is using Unicast to reach the gateway, and that means that that signal will be received by the gateway, which is according to the shortest path within that internet network. And that gateway will just forward the request to the appsim.server. But because you are in a provider independent addressing there, the DOTS attack is not only experienced from the network provider one, but it is also experienced from the network provider two, because you are using provider independent addressing there. So the request in this case, because you are using Unicast addressing, your mitigation request wasn't received by all the gateways that are located in distinct locations of the routers, and the mitigation is only enforced in the partial path and not in all the path in which you are experiencing the DOTS. In the other case, if you have the provider assigned, for instance, assigned the schema, in this case again, if we assume that you are using Unicast within the internal network, your request will be received, for instance, by the gateway which is located in R1. The gateway which is in R1 will forward the request to the upstream server, but the attack isn't subject to the IP address which is assigned by network provider 1, but if it is subject to the IP address which is assigned by network provider 2, the server which is located in the domain 2 should be contacted instead of this one. But you have a problem there because the request was sent to the first gateway. So in these two examples, this is just to illustrate which are the cases in which it is not recommended to use Unicast addresses when you are contacting your upstream .server, that it happens to be your .gateway. Yes, Roland. Yeah, I see you that you.
No. We finish. Continue this.
Okay. Yeah. So this is my last slide, and I prefer to focus on the questions last bullet.
So I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes for questions, please.
I have a question.
Yeah. That's
So decisions about, whether or not to use any cast addressing and the topological issues that you described in this slide. I mean, this is network engineering 101. Do we really need to get to that level of detail in our recommendations? If we do, that's okay. I mean, and I certainly see the need to it could help to put some operational, because we already have some, guidance as to some of the things that are external to DOTS that operators need to do. So I can see, be sure to consider, your normal network engineering 101, routability, reachability types of issues. I'm not sure that we didn't really need a separate document for it. So I can see this recommendation being a recommendation. A deployment recommendation, but do you believe that a separate document is really needed for this, or do you anticipate it being enfolded into use cases or requirements? Or
I don't care. The most important is to have the information somewhere and recorded by the working group, and this is an open question to the working group to decide how to. For me, there's a list of behaviors and guidelines on the way the DOTS client and gateways have to behave in the multi-homing context. How to document that for me is just a logistic, and it's up to the working group to decide how better to handle that.
I mean, I interpret this as, don't create routing loops and don't create routing black holes. I mean, that's how I interpret this more than anything else.
So I think we need a little more discussion on this. I would toss out a couple of data points. First, Not 20 minutes ago, our area director told us, wow, you have 3 informational documents. Boy, that seems like a lot. Maybe you should rethink you should have less. So I'm a little scared to say maybe we have 4. Second of all, we were talking about, I think a little earlier, whether there are any requirements relative to multi-homing. I actually saw a definition for a multi-home client, but I saw no requirements for it. So this kind of helps kind of inform what we do here. And I also noticed in this document, very helpfully, it talks about requirements and architecture and in borders kind of on implementation. So I also would suggest maybe we need to decompose, all of which I think we need to do on the mailing list in the interest of moving forward.
Yeah, just one clarification. What I understood from Kathleen is that the ISG doesn't recommend to the publication of the use cases and the requirement document, and not the amount of the information documents per se. So I don't see the link between the two discussions there, but anyway, that's just another story.
So the underlying reason for the ISG's advice is to manage the amount of documents that are coming. I postulate this, and you may or may not agree. But I think I actually very much welcome that you put this in the form of a document. I mean, this is very useful, and it's good to read it that way. I do agree with Roman that probably we need to see like where these things roll into the existing documents, like use cases, requirements, architecture. What's the implications?
So Kathleen Moriarty, ED, I'm not as concerned about, number of documents in watching this. It was more that I'm interested to hear maybe on the mailing list or show of hands or something interest in this, as opposed to the, a very few number of people that stood up, right? Because that's not the working group. That's, a couple of people's opinions.
Oh, point well taken. Do you wish us to ask for a show of hands at this point, or should it?
However you want to handle it. I just don't want to be killed because of a couple of comments.
Yeah, I mean,
Unless the whole working group.
so multi-homing is important. At the interim meeting, we very clearly stated we're blocking the architecture document on resolving it, and we have use cases that do multi-homing, so we need to say something about it or kind of deal with it, bring to closure what the working group needs to do during multi-homing. I don't think we know what to do, and boy, it's really phenomenal. We have a lot of text that describes what we could do in the multi-homing space. I would suggest that we don't know what to do next, and in the interest of time, I would say let's take it to the mailing list to figure out how we tease this out, what its implication is for this draft, what the implication is for other drafts.
Any objections at this moment? Otherwise, we will proceed as stated.
Thank you. So next up, we're switching to start talking about protocols and implementations. And first up, we have Kaname, who's going to tell us about the experience during the hackathon.
And actually, before he starts, I'd like to say how amazing it was that we had a hackathon session for DOTS. Godots, I believe, waiting for Godots, and like it was even like listed as one of the good achievements at the hackathon. And so I'm very happy we had that, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about the implementation from Konami. So that's really great. Go for it. Yes.
Oh, I want to hear about implementations from Konami. I also want to hear about implementations from others too.
Yeah. Thank you for introduction. I'm Kaname Nishizuka from IETF Communications. I'd like to introduce the Go implementation of DOTS. Okay, yes, we opened the code. I hope this is a good news to you, this working group. This code is available in GitHub, this URL, and you can search for this code by hitting Go DOTS, maybe. And then the license is Apache 2.0, so it's free to use. And yes, you can deploy the code only by a go get command. So you can do it. So then we joined the hackathon of this IETF. This IETF last weekend, and with this code. Actually, the most of code was developed and tested internally beforehand. So what was developed in this hackathon is that first, we made the code easy to be deployed in various environments. For example, we made a Docker compose file for each services, and also we refined the configuration part, which is rather complex. And second, we clarified the documents, README and comments in the code, and enriched, especially for newcomers to this field. Okay, then at the hackathon, we made a demonstration of one user scenario which triggers a black hole routing from victim side. So the demo scenario was constructed in a Docker environment, so it can be ported to your environment. Our project attracted at least 4 people, which includes IX people and ISP people during the hackathon. Then we explained what DOT is and showed the demo. Okay, this is the second good news. We do demo on bits and bytes today. So it's from 7:15 to 9:15 p.m. So yeah, please visit us on the site. Okay, this is our demo in one paper. The demo scenario is enabling DDoS protection in an upstream network by DOT protocol. Yeah, what you can do, what you can see in this demo is that a DOT client in victim side sends a mitigation request to a DOT server over DOT signaling channel. Then a DOT server receives and validates a request, then start mitigation by kicking a blocker. In this demo, the blocker is GoBGP server, which triggers black hole routing in the service operator's network. In fact, the DOT client is in some cloud service, and service provider's network is in fact in our lab network, but DOT request conveyed over the internet. So you can see this demo in bits and bytes. Okay, I'd like to introduce 3 lessons learned from our experience. So yeah, we talked about these lessons learned in the yesterday's design team meeting, but I'd like to repeat them in order to show you, hear from you. First point, yeah, more description on specification on mutual authentication is needed. I think a current draft is using a DTLS-based client certificate. In lab, we tend to use self-signed certification. Then the question is, how can we bind the DTLS or TLS channel and customer, which is a mitigation scope? So a CN or SNI server name indicator should be used. So it's not clearly documented. And the second question is, what else for mutual authentication? We'd like to find some other technology for mutual authentication. Then a question is again, how can we bind the authenticated entity with customer or mitigation scope? That is a question. Okay, the second point, we are still searching for good RESTconf library. As an alternative, QAP DTLS, which is used in signal channel, can be used for data channel. So we took these strategies, but we want to implement it on RESTconf if we can. So if you have opinion about this strategy, or if you know good RESTconf library, please share to the working group. Okay, third point is about heartbeat mode. We think zero heartbeat mode should be allowed between .client and .server. Yeah, as a starting point of implementation in lab, we used zero heartbeat mode, but also we realized that there are several use cases as discussed in the last IETF meeting. For example, residential CPE use cases and ad hoc .client. So yeah, so must in requirement draft 603 should be relaxed. This is our proposal. Yep.
Sorry, Fleming Andreas. Yeah, so I know the question about open source RESTconf came up in the design team meeting as well. So I asked around, and what I have learned since then apparently is that Open Daylight actually has a RESTconf module in it. It's not clear how easy it is to take that out, but there is some code there at least. That was the only thing that I learned about.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were familiar with that one already.
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. From an operational perspective, I would support relaxing the heartbeat requirement to should.
Thank you.
Artem Gavrichenko, once again, Curator Labs. Regarding the relaxing of the must here, I had better consider it once again, because the lack of heartbeat in a possibly congested network path due to, denial of service attack can itself indicate the necessity of mitigation taking place. So I think we should not we should reconsider this, but don't agree on relaxing this easily.
Okay, Dave Dawson in the yesterday meeting gave me good advice. We must, how about this? We must implement the heartbeat, but we can use zero heartbeat mode.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Dave Dawson's suggestion is that we must implement the heartbeat, but we can use zero heartbeat mode if we want.
Okay, see, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Nick Teague.
So Nick, Andrew was in the queue first, if I can let him jump in.
Typical, Andrew.
Yes, pearls before swine.
How's the big?
Yeah. So very quickly to Fleming's point about Open Daylight, yes, Open Daylight does implement RESTconf, and I've used it successfully in the past. I guess the question I have is whether that is sufficient for interrupt, because that would be a single implementation for the server side. The client side, I think, is not a particular issue, but I'll let Kanata speak to that.
I could check.
Could you hear that? Because I couldn't fully follow, but maybe my acoustics is not as good as yours.
Andrew, can you just repeat?
Can you come back? Ah, perfect. And we push the red button. The ghost is eating it.
I was saying that Open Daylight is a fine RESTconf implementation. I'm wondering if it will be sufficient to meet the requirement for two unique implementations that are interoperable. I have had no problem finding client-side implementations, that is, clients using RESTconf. But if we are stuck solely with Open Daylight, I'm not sure that's sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
To my understanding, and Kathleen, correct me, two implementations is a requirement for full standards track, not for proposed standards. So that means we are okay. Of course, it's always good to have more, but from a status perspective, we are fine.
Thank you. Nick Teague. No, I just wanted to echo some of the discussion on the zero heartbeat idea. It's not so much that we should, I agree that we should have a must implement the heartbeat and then have an option to turn it off for certain scenarios where it is understood that turning it off poses a certain risk or poses a certain change in the way that we deal with the logic. There are arguments for ad hoc communications which don't require the constant backwards and forwards of a heartbeat, such as certain MSPs talking to each other, or in subscriber networks where you maybe have 3 million, who knows. So I think there is it was just to echo support for that.
And to keep us moving, I'm cutting the line after Fleming.
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. I just wanted to clarify my previous remarks, exactly what Nick said. That's what I meant by that.
Yep, good. Thank you.
Fleming and Jason. Yes. So on the whole heartbeat thing, I have enormously mixed feelings about the heartbeat. On one hand, right, scalability, I'm very concerned about it, right, especially with some of the use case scenarios we have. On the other hand, we have scenarios that say we have to be able to traverse NATs. I don't know how to reconcile all of that, but I am concerned, about heartbeat in general in this protocol. I don't think it's well understood what the implications are right now.
Yeah, I guess, we also need to test how the bit can overcome that things. So yeah, we need to more check on the heartbeat thing. But yeah.
So given that feedback, I think that cascades into multiple drafts that we're trying to get done. So this certainly speaks to the protocol drafts themselves, but it would appear that the requirements language might need to be tuned as well. So it seems valuable to put a note out as a GitHub issue so we track this either to closure to figure out what we've resolved, or we can further discussion as to what to do next. Roland, you're jumping up here.
I was just going to say, we need to have more discussion about zero heartbeat configuration scenarios. And since the working group does end up that we believe that that's valuable, then we need to actually put a use case in to illustrate it.
So it cascades into more documents.
Okay. Yep. About IANA consideration. Yeah, we think we need assignment for default port number. 4646, which represents ... for signal channel, which is inspired from draft Mortensen dots over UDP, is used in our implementation, and we used 4647 for data channel, but exactly we need some IANA assignment when our protocol is standardized. And here implementation specific problems is written like this. First point is traffic data collection. Traffic information should be returned from dot servers, like incoming traffic, block traffic, path traffic. But we noticed that we need additional software components to collect those data from network equipment or mitigation boxes, but it is very implementation specific, so we cannot make any assumption beforehand, but it is required. So this is difficult problem to implementers. The second point is partially valid request. One mitigation request can contain multiple scopes. But when a mitigation request, we include valid scope and invalid scope at the same time. What is appropriate behavior? So reject all the past valid requests only. So it could break some interoperability with other implementations. So second point is this is the second point of our implementation specific problems.
Roland Evans, Arbor Networks, traffic data collection and export of statistics. My view is that they're outside the scope of this working group. As you say, it's very implementation specific. There's a lot more than PPS and BPS to be concerned about, right? Just all the different layer 7 stuff. And there are mechanisms like IPFix and other things that can be used to return this information to a requesting DOTS entity outside the scope of DOTS. We're basically now turning ourselves into a network telemetry system if we go down this path. So I would recommend that we think very, very carefully before we do this. Again, my individual view with regard to partially valid requests, I'm not so sure that determining validity is necessarily something that we need to make a judgment on the DOT server. I think that that's more something that we need to make a validity judgment on with regards to the orchestration systems and other things. So I'm not so sure that that necessarily applies. If the sense of the group is that it does apply, my recommendation would be to pass the valid request only.
Yep. Thank you. So we think at any time we need to make some decision about the behavior of this kind of things when we do the interoperability with other implementations. But your opinion is noted there. Thank you. Okay, as a next step, our implementation is now OSS, so we'd like to make it to be adapted to the various deployment scenario, and we keep going on the implementation of working group draft and make feedback to the specifications. So we can collaborate on it. So your feedback is very welcome.
Hi, David Olson, Sandvine. From your implementation, I'm wondering if you found from the message size any concern about the size of the datagram whether we need to be concerned about fragmentation or anything. After you made the COAP and the CBOR and the DTLS and all that together.
Okay, yeah, we just tried the small mitigation request. So yeah, we'd like to try that. Yeah, thank you for that.
Do you know how big it was?
Yep.
Do you know how many bytes it was in the UDP packet?
How many? About, you know, about. Okay. I'll get back to you later. So yeah, DOT is getting popular. We realized in the hackathon, so we'd like to do interoperability testing as the next hackathon in IETF 100. In the design team meeting, we talked with implementers each other, and we thought that signal channel interop would be the first step. But it is not committed yet. But we'd love to do that. Yeah, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, this is really cool. And as you said, it would be nice to do some interoperability and maybe more hacking at Singapore 100. Who would be interested? Because like interoperability, it's always nice to have more than one. So who is interested in doing that? No commitment at this point. I'm just asking for interest. Any show of hands? Any shyness? Yeah, so there we have 1, 2 at the back. 3, okay. Do you want to state your name and company for the record, or rather not? Just show of hands. So to leave the bar of commitment less. Okay, I see you, I know you, so that's fine. So that's at least 3 different companies if I counted this.
All right, I'm staring very hard at some other vendors.
Oh, Andrew, yeah.
My hand is raised.
Oh.
Okay, cool. So that gives us 4 plus NTT, that's 5. That would be awesome. Yeah, so then please, if you have any questions or need any help in preparing for that, let the chairs know. We will do anything in our power to support that. So that's great. Okay, and thank you so much. I'm sorry? The AD as well, so she's smiling. So this is, yeah. So thank you very much for Kanami for making this first great step forward, and I'll be looking forward to more in Singapore. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks again.
And one more thing I wanted to repeat about doing interop that came up in the design team meeting. If this puts someone that's on the fence to participate, your code does not need to be open source, and you are releasing no IPR by bringing your implementation. So if you are kind of wondering, does that imply kind of anything that I bring it in terms of kind of a note well or anything else? It does not. If you have an appliance or you want to bring your thing on a black box, you can absolutely do that. So next up, we have Nick, who's going to start talking about the DOTS signal and data channel. And because we're a little bit behind time, Nick, I'm cutting some time off. So I'm giving you a 20-minute block for both, given the
I don't think I'll even need that, but thank you.
That's what other presenters thought.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see. Okay, so I'm here channeling Tiru. I'm going to do the DOTS and signal channels drafts. These were adopted last time or shortly thereafter. So we've had we've dropped a couple of versions since the transition. So the first transition, the 00 was the adoption, and we're on 02 now. We've addressed all comments received from the working group for both drafts so far. Going on to the signal channel specifically, the mitigation request, we replaced the idea, the terminology of policy ID with mitigation ID. There was some confusion around the term policy and everything else that we wanted to kind of clear up. Session channels, the session configuration will also replace policy ID with session ID just to keep some uniformity in that. Aliases could be created either using the DOTS data channel or direct configuration. Direct configuration being somebody typing something on a command line somewhere or into into a GUI or whatever it is. Previously, that had been kind of like, I think, referred to as direct connection. So it was just to kind of give it a bit more clarification on that one. The DOTS server derives the DOTS client identity using the algorithm discussed in section 7 of RFC 7589 on NetConf to couple DOTS signal and data channel sessions. You can read that. Enjoy. There are some further discussions around that we had from Kaname's implementation regarding things like identity and also tying in the signal channel and the assets that were being communicated to the signal channel, well, the prefixes and so on, and aliases and everything, and tying those to the customer at the back end of that had already been gone through the data channel. So there was some resplicing that needed to happen there, which obviously would be informed by what Kaname's been doing. So we can take that offline and have a look at it. The next updates. Dave Dawson actually put in an email this morning, I think, which we obviously haven't had a chance to really address yet. And there was a number of questions and comments in there which we will have to look at and address. So assume some of those are in addition to this if you have read that email. We were going to add in a -1 value for lifetime parameter mitigation to indicate an indefinite mitigation lifetime so that somebody could basically say, keep doing this and don't stop until such time as we decide that to send a suitable withdrawal. It's just a case of like, mitigate me, or I mean, it could be for always on services, however anybody wants to do. We also did add a new parameter mitigation request to signal .server to initiate mitigation after the server ceases receiving client signals. So similar to the discussion around the heartbeat before, you could also have something like, oh, well, if the heartbeats disappear or if the signals disappear, then auto mitigate or whatever. That would be a switch. Some customers would want that. Some people won't. Other people would trust it. Other people don't. So some people might just be doing a maintenance and wouldn't have told you. Further next updates, again, in addition to whatever Dave brought up that we need to address, or anybody else, is the mitigation lifetime was negotiated. There's a little bit of confusion because the mitigation lifetime is negotiated in the request response, but there's also some negotiation in the signal channel session configuration. So we just need to kind of like figure out exactly what it is we mean by that and what we're doing with it and whether we want that to go ahead. It just doesn't make sense to do it in two places, and especially if one takes precedence over the other or anything like that. And I don't think you can do it on a session configuration basis personally. So that's on the signal channel. Is there any questions, comments? Anybody wants to do on that before I go into the data?
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. What was the logic behind the proposal or the thinking that it might make sense to do this, do the mitigation session limitation during the session negotiation? What's the logic behind that?
I don't recall.
Yeah.
So I can't remember the discussion that it came up, but it was there, and obviously I think it's worth taking note as well. This is our first revision since we adopted this one, so there's probably some baggage there, and there's some changes and everything else that have occurred on a rolling basis that some things have been, there may be some overlap or anything like that. So I wouldn't put too much.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to point out for folks, something for folks to think about is that it's certainly a viable scenario where in a given DOTS client requests different mitigations at different times with different values, right?
Yep.
Based on the specifics of a particular attack. So we want to make sure that we preserve, that kind of flexibility on the part of what the DOTS client wants to request.
Yeah. No, I don't think it makes much sense to do it on a thing. I mean, you might want to set defaults or something, but I don't. Even then, that could be configured other ways. Fleming? Run.
Fleming Andreas, this is just a general question really on both drafts. One of the things that we talked a lot about in the beginning and that we have in the requirements as well is the need for extensibility.
Yeah.
It's not so clear to me when I look at these drafts exactly how that's satisfied. I'm guessing that if I use a RESTConf from the data channel, right, there is some underlying machinery that we're going to be taking advantage of. It might be helpful to just elaborate on that. On the signal channel, on the other hand, I'm not really sure how it works. Maybe that's just me not understanding exactly.
No, I think that's a fair comment. At the minute, it's a bit vague, and I think that's something we need to kind of address a bit better.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thanks.
So, So data channel. So we extended the ACL Yang model to handle fragments and support rate limiting action. There's an example of it. Brief bit on the filtering of fragments. We haven't really done a whole load of changes on the data channel other than around this. So the filtering of fragments to defend against DDoS attacks that use only non-initial fragments. You can read on the slide there exactly what it does. It's just to add some additional filtering capabilities into the filter transfer portion of the data channel, and it just brings it in line with various potential mitigation strategies and so on that exist. And that's it. So any comments, concerns? Again, this is like a first drop, I think, since we adopted these, so there's still a way to go.
Hi, Dave Dolson.
Yep.
Is this on GitHub, or will you put it on the Dots GitHub?
Sorry, I was actually going to talk about it. Yes, we will put it on the .wg GitHub so that we can start opening issues and everything else. Yes.
So I just want to finesse that. So we're saying we're going to put it on GitHub, so we'll have version tracking on the document there, so we can do pulls, and
Yes.
we're going to do issue tracking.
Yeah, we can do all that.
Okay.
Everything we've done for architecture and requirements and so on.
Phenomenal. And can you see that list with the note of extensibility that Fleming brought and the things that Konami got out of the hackathon?
Yes.
That'd be a good start. Thank you.
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. I forgot to mention, with regards to the idea of the always on or perpetually, enabled mitigation, until such time as termination is requested. We do see that in the real world with regards to financial institutions and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, we have experience of it where it's like, oh, we want to. There'll be some demand, some kind of murmurings on a forum somewhere. And so, it sits there for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever or a campaign or something like that. So it's just to kind of cover that, so they can be handled via dots versus a coordination. Okay.
Maybe a quick question is co-chair, who has read the draft? Quick show of hands, just so we get a feeling about the state of review at this point. I mean, I know it's new. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's much more than I expected. 2, 3, like 8, 9. Wow. Okay. That's a good set of review for an early part. Have you, of the people who raised their hands, have you already submitted some of your comments, or is there like a lot of it? No, sorry, my question is the other way around. If you have read the draft but not yet submitted your comments but intend to do so, could you indicate that? Okay, so there's a wave coming for you. I think probably, I'm just speaking now on your behalf, I think it would be good to submit these comments soonish, so that they can be worked on.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think
I mean, what we can do is once we get the GitHub up, we can start to distill those, and maybe it's best to wait till the GitHub is up before we start flooding it, and then that way we won't miss any. We can
So
keep it moving.
GitHub and mailing list, please.
So
Okay.
we'll mail out once the GitHub's ready. Cool.
Cool. For your expectation, I think the GitHub should be up fairly soon. Yeah. So like expect a few days. So hold your breath and shoot away. Okay, thank you. And I think we are back on site.
So we're back on schedule. So we now have 2 individual drafts to discuss. First up, Ned, you're going to talk about server discovery. Again, another topic that we raised at the interim. So thank you for putting a draft to talk about what we talked about.
Yeah. Thank you, Roman. Yeah. So this is just a reminder of the context, is that there's a need for the DOS client to know the IP address or the name of the DOS server to contact. And currently, the DOS architecture is silent about that. It's assumed that by some magic, the DOS client is configured with the information for the DOS servers to be contacted. So there's a void there, and we are trying to fill that void with this document. So maybe this day is to go back to Roland document and to extract the use cases and to classify the use cases. But I am not listing all of them. I removed the one that it's not my favorite, but to balance that, I removed the HomeNet use case, which is not figured by Roland. So if we just consider all these use cases, we classified them whether they require a CP or not, and also whether there is a need or whether the DOTS, the denial of service mitigation service, is provided by the AppSim network provider or it is provided by a cloud service provider. So you have the various combination there. So if we start to examine this list, and if we have in mind how we can answer to the previous question we have, how to configure or to provide to the DOTS client the identity of the DOTS servers to contact. If we focus on the first use case, for instance, there is a single network which is single homed. For this one, we can just answer to him, yeah, it's easy, just use an unicast address, you will just hit your DOTS server, that's easy. But the problem is that there are other use cases there that the DOTS mitigation service is not your AppSim provider. That means that if you are using unicast address, you won't never reach the DOTS server. In the meantime, if we have the other use cases that require to have an integrated DOTS client, for those, it is just appropriate to avoid requiring new functionalities to DOTS clients, just to reuse and to leverage on existing features on this node. That is that leveraging on existing tools to discover the DOTS server is appropriate. That's why we think that using the straightforward in-app PTR for that case would be recommended. But in the other column there, we see that all of them, or almost all the use cases, are using the CPE. And if you have the network providers, today we are provisioning or providing configuration information to the CPE when it's attached to the network, and we are just using DHCP and other tools, TR69 and so on, to provision the CPE. So it is just intuitive for us as a provider just to reuse these tools to provide DOTS identity using this existing tool. That's why the use of the DHCP may be appropriate for this case. So if we do a summary of this, that we consider all the use cases, each of them may have some specificity there, and no of the tools that I mentioned, the use of the MDNS, for instance, the use of unicast, the use of DHCP, does not solve all the problem for all the use cases. So each of these use cases have its own unique requirement. So it is unlikely that one single solution is to be recommended for that. So that's why we are proposing this unified discovery method, in which we are identifying at least the 4 steps to be followed by the DOTS client. The first one is that simple, that to assume that this is something which is explicitly configured to the DOTS client. If you have something which is configured, just go with your local configuration. This local configuration can be manual, can be static, or can be retrieved by DHCP. Once you have this information retrieved to you, just proceed with the service resolution. The service resolution will provide you with the other information, for instance, to discover whether you have the same IP address for both the data channel or the signal channel, or whether you use TCP or UDP and so on, this kind of stuff. And if the service resolution fails, then you can use other tools which are available locally. For instance, you can use DNS service discovery or MDNS. At the end of the day, if all of the steps fail, then you can use the unicast address as a last resort. And in the document, we are not recommending in any order in which you can proceed for the discovery. Just an implementation may decide to run all of them separately, or just to stop for instance, for the first one, and doesn't implement the others. So this is the main contribution from this document, to say that there is no justification to have one single mechanism to discover or to configure the DOTS servers to DOTS clients. It is likely that we will need multiple tools to discover this information and to provide to DOTS client. And it is good to have for deterministic behavior of DOTS clients to have a unified algorithm that will be followed by this implementation. And this is what we are providing here. Yes, Roland?
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. I have a question. There's a lot of discussion about Anycast here. It seems that there's an assumption that Anycast is going to be a pervasive addressing mechanism for DOT servers. What is that assumption based upon?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
There seems to be an assumption
Yeah.
that Anycast is going to be a pervasive or very common addressing mechanism for DOT servers. Am I misunderstanding that? Because there's all this talk about Anycast.
No, it's only for the simple reason that if you read the DOTS architecture, there is Anycast vision, it is messaged there.
Okay.
So
earlier, many meetings ago, we talked about the fact that initially, while DOTS is on its initial adoption curve, that number one explicit local configuration, whether that's manual or whether it's via some kind of provisioning system, is going to be, we anticipate that being the overwhelmingly pervasive way of configuring DOTS clients to tell them which servers to communicate with.
Yeah, this is a good feedback to have.
So I would break number one out so that we don't lump all those different things together, because these different mechanisms here.
Actually, in the draft, they are separated into bullets. The one, the static one, and the other one, the dynamic one with the GP and so on. Yeah. Yeah. So I won't go into details how all these mechanisms, the specification of the DHCP option, the specification of all the other tools, which you can find more details in the draft. And this is my last slide, sorry, to have some discussion on the draft and how to proceed for the next step.
Don't say sorry. Discussion is good. So comments. I see two people coming to the mic. Or one person. We have a minute, so shoot away. Please be brief.
Okay, Kanami Nishizuka from NTT Communications. Previous slide, please. Okay, as an implementer, we'd like to keep the DOTS client simple. So we don't like to make it must to follow those all of implementations in order to make keep it simple.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm just cutting the line at Roland because we have to keep moving. We have one more other presentation here. So
yeah,
you could be brief.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And this is why the text there is clear. You may implement, there is no recommendation to implement all the steps there.
Okay.
But anyway, we can tweak the language to see how it will fit the requirements. But the intent is not to impose that you implement all the steps and all the mechanisms. That's at least the current state of the draft. But it's depending on discussion, we will update that to reflect it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So but I agree with your comment. Yeah.
Maarten Aartsen, NCSCNL. So this may be out of ignorance because I'm pretty new to DOTS, but is there any mechanism foreseen for bootstrapping trust? Because otherwise, like doing automatic discovery and then doing out of band or manual configuration of trust seems a bit of a, well, then why wouldn't you configure it?
Yeah, this is really a very good point, and we have touched on that in fact in the draft. That for the CP use case, what we are considering is that we are leveraging on existing practices we have, for instance, for SIP server services and so on, is that the trust is manufactured with the CPE. So you have this shipped when you have the device, which is manufactured by the provider. But if you are in another situation in which you cannot allow such practice, what we discussed in the security section of the document is that you can use the BRISCI, which is the ANIMA staff, to discover and to establish the trust automatically. But to do that, you need to start from the name of the server and then to run all the authentication afterwards. So we have both, which is discussed in the draft. And if you read it, you will find this kind of details there. But this is really a very good point.
Does it need a second answer, Bob?
We should look at NetComp's zero touch. We should also comment on it and say, does NetComp zero touch give us anything?
Well, it opens Urban Networks. There needs to be some good discussion with the architecture and requirements folks about all this.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are still on track and moving, and thank you very much for this presentation. Very interesting. And the last presentation. And I apologize for being a little bit rude on Bob when he inserted. Okay, thank you. Please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I will present the last evolution of our draft. So just to remind, so the first initial idea was to use hop by hop option in IPv6. Basically to store information and re-embed the information along path. So we presented a different place, including, of course, DOS, OPSEC, and 6MAP. So we understand that even if we restrict ourselves to the, let's say, in intra-domain use case, there may have been some issues. So, and it's not recommended actually with a new version to use it and to have new proposition. So our proposition basically now, we wanted to keep the original idea of when we come with IPv6, which originally was to have a, let's say, a safeguard mechanism where you are not able to reach from the DOS client, the DOS server, to signal the attack. So we wanted to keep this original ID. But we, these versions, we don't want to necessarily have the need to a new protocol like we proposed before. What we need anyway, and what is similar to what we have proposed before, is to have something asynchronous, meaning that we don't, in this auxiliary mechanism, so I really want to emphasize that it's not be used as a first mechanism for signaling. It's just a way that, for instance, in particular in case, for example, if you use the heartbeat, you don't, the server realize that the client is not responding, it can retrieve some information. So we want basically to have this kind of repository where the dot client can inform the server then can retrieve information. So let's say it's a bit different that, for example, for the gateway, it's similar, but in the sense here we want something where we can put some persistent information even before the attack. I mean, meaning in the case where the clients maybe realize that it's on attack, but it's not confirmed yet, can push some information that if the attack occurs and the client is not able to signal the attack afterwards, the server can still retrieve some information that can trigger then the mitigation. And as I say, it's independent of the both protocol between the client and the repository that we call now, and from the other side with the server. And basically that's it for me. I want to hear some feedback and so on.
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. Question. So in terms of resiliency of the communications channel, one of the recommendations would be to have the actual DOTS communications take place out of band, right, on an out of band connection. Of course, a lot of folks won't do that, right? But given that that's one way, to ensure that communications, do have a clear pathway between the client and the server, DOTS client and DOTS server, what is the value of having an additional in-band auxiliary channel? What is the value of that?
I mean, the proposal here is more to have, maybe it's from an architectural point of view as well, to have something where you can, let's say, put information in the persistent way.
I'm still not sure I follow, because again, if I want to ensure that the communications channel is available and clear, I establish a completely parallel out-of-band communications channel, right? Communications path, right, for DOTS as is being discussed today in the architecture draft. So why would I want to use this specific mechanism for an additional auxiliary signaling mechanism in the in-band path? I don't understand that.
I mean, in the sense that in the case of the attack, the client may not be able even to send again the signaling information, but some information is already stored in the repository that the server can reach. So maybe the client basically now is the case of the client is completely isolated. The server can still retrieve some information.
Okay, thank you.
So if I could ask a clarifying question. So is that a new use case to talk about?
Yeah.
Not now, but
I think I'm kind of, so Tobias Gonrom, Huawei, working group chair here at OFF. I'm also confused a little bit. It's like I can see maybe I want to upload information to a server in case I'm going deaf or silent. Yes, I can see that. I'm not quite clear on the, but this is stupid. This is my own stupidity. I'm not quite clear what's the benefit of uploading it somewhere else instead of uploading it to the server. And so I'm not grasping what you try to solve. Maybe you can enlighten me.
So, yeah. So the original, let's say the original idea that we have is that, for instance, to let's say have this information that you multiply at different places that you can still retrieve. And I don't know, the server, in my opinion, should be only be, let's say, how to say, reached or requested when you really need mitigation. It's what I understand, but.
So, may I comment on that? Okay. Okay. So, like we have a relationship client-server situation, and maybe I have more than one. Yes. In which case, I would inform all the servers, yes, okay, if I go silent, do this. So I don't see a strong need to have another repository of which I'm not sure that the other servers will see it if something goes wrong. So I'm not. I can see this is interesting, but I'm not so seeing it as a strong requirement personally. Again, Tobias Gordon, working group chairhead off.
Okay.
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. I'd really like to see discussion of this in detail, the benefits and how it's envisaged to work on the mailing list.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this brings us to the end of our formal agenda. So just to recap where we stood based on all the discussion, going through the architecture use case and requirements document, we were tentatively thinking that we would be able to go to working group last call. What we heard during the design team meetings and through this session is that we need at least one more version across all three of those documents to consider ourselves done. So we're not declaring working group last call. There's issues to kind of work out, but please bring issues if you have them to the mailing list. We got requirements from the hackathon that may suggest changes. Those things should be combed through as well. And then overall, we need to think about, based on what Kathleen was suggesting, how we might want to be packaging kind of those documents. We've talked about it before, and we can bring up that topic again.
Adding one note, I think the perception from looking at the document's progress, the requirements draft seem to be closest to working group last call. So if you have issues with it, please post them within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Because by that time, I could imagine that we might come close to, they have closed everything other, and then we would initiate working group last call for the requirements first. So if you have something for that, please post it very, very timely for the others as well. But just so you have a feeling about the steps. Sorry, and no, please.
Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. We're going to schedule an interim meeting between now and Singapore.
So my next bullet was we will absolutely hold an interim meeting. We've been finding them to be very successful. So we'll put something on the calendar about halfway between now and Singapore. If there's a desire for design team meetings in between that or multiple interim meetings, kind of let the chairs know. We can kind of figure it out. But again, somewhere halfway between now and Singapore, which historically was October, early October or late September.
Yeah, so our current best practice experience would be one interim meeting between 2 IETFs. Otherwise, I think it's a little bit overloading. Yeah.
Yep, no worries. And the last thing to point out is we saw 5 interested parties for the hackathon. We will not name them. We're very excited that there are 5. We would like to plan kind of that we'll start the discussion before the interim meeting about what we might do, because experience suggests that there's kind of lead time about scoping and preparing what will be done to make that time most productive. So if you did not voice yourself as one of those 5, please kind of let us know. We'd be excited to have more. So with that, Tobias, anything you have to add?
No, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Great presentations, and we will see you all in Singapore. Thank you, and have a good evening. Bye. Oh, and last thing, remember Bits and Bytes. There will be a presentation of the DOTS implementation and blue sheets. Who has not signed the blue sheets yet? Can you move the blue sheets over to the people? Okay, please. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh, two sheets. Thank you.